The historical context of the Iran-Israel conflict is rooted in complex geopolitical shifts, ideological clashes, and regional power struggles that have evolved over decades. Despite not sharing a border, Iran and Israel's rivalry has become one of the defining conflicts in the Middle East, with significant implications for regional and global stability. 1. Early relations pre-1979. Friendly ties under the Shah. Before 1979, Iran, under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, maintained a close relationship with Israel. Both countries had common interests, including opposition to the spread of Arab nationalism, which was popular in many neighboring countries. During this period, Iran and Israel shared military and intelligence cooperation, and Iran supplied oil to Israel, circumventing Arab oil embargoes. Iran's role as a U.S. ally. As an ally of the United States, Iran was integrated into the American strategic framework in the region, which included cooperation with Israel. The Shah's government viewed Israel as a useful partner against the growing influence of the Soviet Union and its allied Arab states, like Syria and Iraq. 2. Iranian Revolution, 1979, and shift in foreign policy. Overthrow of the Shah. In 1979, the Islamic Revolution in Iran resulted in the overthrow of the Shah and the establishment of the Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. This marked a radical shift in Iran's foreign policy, with the new regime taking an explicitly anti-Israel and anti-Western stance. Ideological conflict. The Islamic Republic of Iran positioned itself as a leader of resistance against Western influence and Zionism, which it saw as a form of colonialism. Iran's leadership declared Israel to be an enemy of Islam, and committed itself to supporting Palestinian liberation efforts. This ideological stance fundamentally altered Iran's relationship with Israel, making it one of hostility and opposition. 3. Support for anti-Israel groups and proxy warfare. Backing for Hezbollah and Hamas. Iran began providing support to militant groups opposed to Israel, most notably Hezbollah in Lebanon, which emerged during the Lebanese civil war and Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982. Iran also provided assistance to Palestinian groups, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad, which oppose Israel and advocate for Palestinian sovereignty. Expansion of influence. Iran's backing of these groups was part of its broader axis of resistance strategy, aimed at challenging U.S. influence and Israel's power in the Middle East. By building alliances with Hezbollah and other proxies, Iran could project its power regionally and directly challenge Israel without direct confrontation. 4. The Iran-Iraq War, 1980-1988, and regional implications. Indirect effects on Israel. During the Iran-Iraq War, Israel remained largely uninvolved but reportedly provided covert support to Iran, hoping to counterbalance the influence of Iraq's Saddam Hussein, who was a significant threat to Israeli security at the time. However, this limited cooperation did not alter Iran's ideological opposition to Israel. Strengthening Iran's anti-Israel stance. The war fueled Iran's sense of isolation and reinforced its anti-Western and anti-Israel stance, especially given that Iraq was supported by many Western and Arab nations. This conflict cemented Iran's commitment to building alliances with groups and states hostile to Israel. 5. The 1990s. Post-Cold War dynamics and regional tensions. Rise of Israel-Iran hostilities. In the 1990s, as the Cold War ended, the U.S. increased its focus on the Middle East. Iran's growing influence in Lebanon and its continued support for anti-Israel groups began to draw more attention, especially as peace processes between Israel and the Palestinian territories made little headway. Nuclear program concerns. Israel became increasingly wary of Iran's nuclear ambitions, which reportedly began during the Shah's era but accelerated in the 1990s. Iran maintained that its nuclear program was for peaceful purposes, but Israel perceived it as a direct existential threat, with a potential Iranian nuclear weapon shifting the regional power balance. 6. The 2000s. Escalation of proxy warfare and nuclear tensions. Second Intifada and increased support for Palestinian groups. With the eruption of the Second Intifada in 2000, Iran stepped up its support for groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad, which were engaged in armed conflict with Israel. Iran also used these groups to expand its influence in Gaza and the West Bank, amplifying tensions with Israel. Growing nuclear concerns. By the early 2000s, Israel and Western powers became increasingly concerned about Iran's nuclear program, leading to international sanctions and diplomatic efforts to curb it. Israel, in particular, pursued various strategies to halt Iran's nuclear progress, including reported cyber attacks and intelligence operations. 7. The 2010s and the JCPOA Iran nuclear deal. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. In 2015, Iran and 6 world powers, including the United States, China, Russia, the UK, France, and Germany, signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action (JCPOA), a landmark nuclear deal that lifted some sanctions on Iran in exchange for limitations on its nuclear program. Israel strongly opposed the deal, arguing that it did not go far enough to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons and that it would empower Iran's regional ambitions. Israeli concerns over the deal. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was a vocal critic of the JCPOA, calling it a bad deal, and warning that Iran would use the sanctions relief to fund its support for militant groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and other anti-Israel factions. Despite the deal's implementation, Israel continued to engage in covert operations aimed at thwarting Iran's nuclear ambitions, including cyber attacks and the assassination of key Iranian nuclear scientists. 8. The Trump administration and the withdrawal from the JCPOA. U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA. In 2018, President Donald Trump unilaterally withdrew the United States from the JCPOA and reimposed stringent sanctions on Iran. Israel strongly supported this decision, seeing it as a chance to further isolate Iran and halt its nuclear progress. Heightened tensions. In the years following the United States withdrawal, tensions between Israel and Iran intensified. Israel launched a series of covert and overt operations aimed at preventing Iran from advancing its nuclear program, including airstrikes on Iranian facilities in Syria and Iraq. 9. Recent developments. The Abraham Accords. In 2020, Israel signed normalization agreements with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco under the United States-brokered Abraham Accords. While Iran has opposed these normalization efforts, particularly the United Arab Emirates, Israel deal, the accords marked a shift in the regional dynamics, with some Arab states moving closer to Israel as a counterbalance to Iran's growing influence. Ongoing hostilities. Despite the Abraham Accords, Israel remains deeply concerned about Iran's regional ambitions, its nuclear program, and its proxy forces. Iran continues to support groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, and its military presence in Syria has been a frequent target of Israeli airstrikes. Conclusion. The Iran-Israel conflict is rooted in ideological, political, and security concerns, with Israel viewing Iran's nuclear program and support for militant groups as existential threats, while Iran views Israel as an illegitimate, imperialist state. The conflict is shaped by broader regional dynamics, including the influence of the United States, the role of Sunni Arab states, and the shifting alliances in the Middle East. Despite intermittent diplomatic efforts and occasional periods of tension, the relationship between the two countries remains hostile, with Israel and Iran frequently engaged in proxy battles, cyber warfare, and covert operations.